Hello and welcome to Tea and Travel. I'm Carol Schiraldi from Carol's Little World, and this is one of my Austin studio tour sessions on my travel photography. You can find my work at carolslittleworld.com. I run the popular photo blog, Carol's Little World, which was recently ranked one of the top 200 photo blogs in the country, actually globally, just one of the top 200 photo blogs. I've been running the photo blog for a long time. I think it's 10, 15, 20 years, something like that. And I started originally just writing it as a journal and then added photos to it. I'm really a fine art photographer, but I love to travel. So what happened was I decided to combine my passions and do sort of fine art travel photography. There's a lot of different types of photography. There's a lot of people do fine art photography and a lot of people do travel photography. If you look at like National Geographic, their photography is really travel documentary photography, whereas I'm more of a fine art photographer. I travel with a fine art approach. So my goal in traveling is to make compositions, like in essence, like a painter, only I travel with a camera. But travel is a big part of who I am. Like I said, I'm a fine art photography and I love to travel. Those are sort of two prongs to my work. To me, when I was younger, I went to school. I have a master's degree and I love school. I'm a lifelong learner. One of the things that came out of that, though, is that I didn't want to continue going to school forever, but I wanted to continue my education and my studies. To me, I view travel as an education. It's a shared experience and an education. I get to share in cultures and really immerse myself in additional cultures, new cultures, and just see places and people far away and immerse myself in their culture. And that's a big part of it for me. I've met people who travel a lot and they do sort of this, oh, it's Tuesday, we're in Belgium sort of thing. And they don't really see the country or experience the people, or, they go to maybe the touristy spots in a place. When I travel, I tend to stay away from the touristy spots. I tend to stay away from the beaten path and I explore the hidden areas, the places the locals go. And I really try to talk to the locals. I try to learn the language a little bit if I can. I try to get the experience as immersive as I possibly can. I eat the local foods, I share in the local customs, anything I can do to really educate myself about the place I'm visiting. I get asked a lot of times if I do a lot of research when I travel because I seem to know a lot about the places I've been. And my answer is that's a mixed question. Sometimes I do a lot of research, but I also like to travel what I call empty cup, where I'm open to experiences and open to enjoying the culture as it unfolds before me. I like to take away something from every place I've been. I like to think I can learn something from every place I go. And I like to think that my next trip, my favorite trip is going to be my next one. In the early days, when we did exploration, explorers wanted to be the first person to plant a flag somewhere, right? If you think back through history, we had people that wanted to reach Antarctica or reach the North Pole, and they wanted to put that flag in there and say, yeah, I'm the guy who did it. I got to the North Pole, or the woman who did it. Nowadays, every place on the planet has been photographed. The flags are everywhere. There's even a Mars rover that's up taking pictures of Mars. So if you want to photograph something that hasn't been photographed, you probably need to find a planet that nobody's paying attention to. I would recommend Neptune or Pluto because, Pluto had that whole planet, not a planet thing, and it's still bitter. But, it's up to you. But kidding aside, the journey today now to make new and explorative and groundbreaking work is not outwards in planting that flag, it's inwards. We're tasked now with crafting images that are unique, that represent our personal vision and the way we see the world, not just the way the world is. Sometimes people can craft great images by going to a place that's very unexpected. My travels have brought me to places that you've heard of, Kyoto. I was born in New York. I traveled to Iceland. That's a photographer's playground. But I've also gone to places like North Dakota and rural parts of Mexico, where not many photographers go and visit. These are often overlooked places. And I love them just as dearly because I'm showing the world a place that maybe they wouldn't think as a tourist attraction or a place that they would be interested in culturally. A lot of times it's not just, oh, here's this place. Rather, it's here, oh, hey, here's how I see this place. Here's my view of this place. And that's really the essence of what I try to do with my photography. The journey carves us as we explore, as we carve out the world and find places that we haven't visited yet. I thought it would be a good idea to share some of the images as part of the Austin Studio Tour this year. These are some of my travel images from over the years. This is all my work. I get asked that too. Sometimes I don't know why people think I borrow work, but I'm a photographer and this is all my work. Like I said, I've photographed these images over the years I've traveled. I've been traveling for a long time, and some of these are older, some of these are brand new. I have an upcoming book coming out of my images, my travel images from China specifically. The book is called Beautiful Under Heaven, and it will be released very soon. I'm just putting the finishing touches on the book and hope to have it listed on Amazon very soon. If not in the month of December, then of course, surely the first part of next year. I'm also looking for a publisher for my next book, or another book of my travels. I'm working on a book. Eventually I will work on a book, my next book, Safe Travels and Good Light. It will be called Safe Travels and Good Light, which is a phrase I like to say before I embark on a destination. And this will be, instead of a specific place, this will be representative travel images from all over the world, a collection of my travel images from everywhere I've been, just to explore the limits of where I've been. So let's get started. This is an image from Iceland. Iceland was a very interesting place for me because it's a place where the mountains meet the sea. It's Europe's largest desert. I didn't know that. There's a desert in Iceland. A desert, for those of you who don't know, is categorized as a place with not a lot of precipitation. That precipitation does not have to be, a lot of times when we think of the word desert, we think of like the Sahara, where there's a lot of sand. That precipitation can come in the form of snow. In fact, my next trip, if I get to go, will be to Antarctica, which is actually the world's largest desert. But in the past, I actually visited Iceland, and this is a picture of a glacier in Iceland. Now, Iceland is also called the land of fire and ice because they have both glaciers and volcanoes there. And I got to see some of each of that. This is the glacier side of the equation. As part of my travels to Iceland, I got to go into a place called the Jökull, which sounds like Snoopy's brother, but it's actually spelt a little differently. But it's the Jökull Glacial Lagoon, which is basically what happens. The center of Iceland is really ice, and it's thousands of years old. And the ice gradually breaks off in calves, as they call it, and then it forms giant icebergs. And as the icebergs move to the sea, they melt and get smaller and smaller. And eventually they reach a black sand beach where they sort of break up and turn into these, it looks like diamonds on the beach. It's very breathtakingly beautiful. But then they feed into the mid-Atlantic, into the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic. And so I got to go there. Interestingly enough, when there was a storm, I was there during Hurricane Sandy, when actually Hurricane Sandy, the remnants of it hit up in Iceland. But I did get to go on a boat into the glacial lagoon, the Jökull. And so these are some of the icebergs, very large icebergs in the glacial lagoon. And here you can see an iceberg that has a cave underneath it. There are ice caves underneath the icebergs. A lot of times what happens is you can travel in a Zodiac and scoot around the ice and get up even more up close to the icebergs. It's a great time. It's a bit cold. And you can see also the sort of sky here that looks quite almost stormy. It's very soft light. I found as I got further north in Iceland, especially in the glacial lagoon, that the light was very soft. But this is the Jökull. And this is another image from the Jökull. I thought this was interesting because it showcases all the colors that you might find in the iceberg. The icebergs represent our history for thousands of years. They trap particulates from the atmosphere in the ice, and they form different colors. Sometimes you see really vivid blues, but sometimes you also see sort of pinks and beige and browns and all different colors in the ice. And I thought it was really interesting. And to give you an idea, this is a very large wall of ice. This would fit a skyscraper next to it and still be a little bit taller. And here is an image of the iceberg, not a large iceberg, hitting the beach. I love to hit the beach, but this does it differently. And you can see the waves were really kicking up as part of the stormy seas. The North Atlantic is very stormy in general. There's a lot of current and tides and things, and it's just an interesting environment to see the icebergs melt out into the sea. And Iceland also is a place where there are more waterfalls than people and more sheep than people. So this is one of the waterfalls, one of the many waterfalls I got to see during my visit there. I should point out that I'm not usually a waterfall photographer. It's not a subject that captivates me, but I did some of it while I was in Iceland simply because there were so many and they were so very beautiful. In Iceland, one thing is that because it is so north, it's a northern climate, the earth is covered in more of a moss. It's not actually grass covered, and there aren't many trees. So that moss makes for a really interesting color palette. It's really sort of this neon green that you see here. This image is not really very enhanced. It really is that color. I was very captivated by the color palettes in Iceland. I found the black sand beaches with the blue diamond icebergs on them, and the green, neon green moss, and the purple skies, light violet colored skies. Just everything was, and there's places where there's really red earth. It was just really interesting as a color palette for me as a painter, photographer, and artist to see that, to experience that. It's one of those places I would love to go back again to visit. And of course, it just had a beautiful color palette that was sort of unforgettable. It looks almost otherworldly and unforgettable. Now moving on, this is a new location. This is an image from the Li River in China. I had opportunity to go and visit a city called Guilin, which is in south central China. It's very near to actually Vietnam. Now, most people, when they think of China, they think of Beijing, Shanghai, or Hong Kong. And those are certainly places a lot of people go and visit. I was lucky enough to go to Guilin, which is a city, there's a proverb in China. They say the scenery in Guilin is the most beautiful under heaven. And this proverb gave me the title to my book, Beautiful Under Heaven. And this image will actually be incorporated in the cover of my book, my upcoming book. But basically, what's happening here is that you can take rafts, bamboo rafts along the river and enjoy the scenic mountains. And here is the boat dock where you get on the rafts, and of course, more of the beautiful scenic mountains. I was lucky enough to stay right on the banks of this river in a place they call the Mountain Retreat. And it was a beautiful place. Guilin is an interesting place too, because it's not a city. Most people don't go there for their first trip to China. They do choose to go to Beijing or Shanghai or Hong Kong, one of the larger cities. And to fly to Guilin, you really have to travel through another city. So a lot of the visitors to Guilin are other people from China or people who've been to China multiple times. Guilin was also a city that's about the same size as Austin. It's about 1 million people, compared to a city like Beijing that's much larger, or Hong Kong that's very big. It's sort of a mid or almost even small size city by China standards. And because of that, I found the locals to be very friendly. And another thing about it was there's not a lot of, when you go to a city like Beijing, you hear a lot of foreign languages being spoken because it's very touristy. It's a very touristy area. So you're likely to hear German and English and European languages, and Spanish and French and Chinese and Japanese and other languages. In Guilin, it's not uncommon to meet a local who's never heard the English language having been spoken. So because of that, I really got a taste of what local life was like in Guilin. I did get to study the Mandarin language a little bit. I can say a few words in Mandarin. I think I can say I like fish and I am an American tourist kind of thing. And so I have to say ni hao ma, which means hello, how are you? I was a terrible student of Mandarin, I will confess, but I really did try to learn a few words, and I was a little bit able to say a few things while I was there. I did also have a guide that helped me in my journey, so that was made it a little less, I didn't have to depend on my Mandarin skills, which is a good thing because I really don't have many. And this is a detail of the reflection in the water. The river was just beautiful there. It had this grass was sort of growing in it. And also, of course, those beautiful mountains reflected in the scenery. I also got to visit a place called the Dragon's Backbone, which is also called, the formal name of it is the Longshan Rice Terraces. And these are rice terraces that date back 800 years. And they're actually up in a different mountain region outside of Guilin. Excuse me. And as part of these rice terraces, they built little villages atop the rice terraces. And actually they're built into the sides of the terraces. The terraces are have many steps and they're sort of elevated to be able to better grow and cultivate the rice. And these buildings, you can see the very typical architecture in that region. It's wooden buildings with this sort of semicircular gray tile roofs that are very common across China even. It's very common Chinese architecture. And I found it to be very beautiful. I actually stayed in a hotel at the top of the rice terraces for a few days and got to stay in sort of the cool mountain air. I had a hotel room with a balcony overlooking the little village, and it was just so quaint and charming. I remember thinking, I wish I could just stay here and write a novel or something, or, you know, take pictures forever. It was very quaint and charming. But you can see the very typical architecture here of the mountain town that's located in Longshan. And this is another village I got to explore. There's an ancient village called Dashu, which dates back 1,000 years. And it's actually kind of famous. It was used in the background for several movies. I think they filmed a Jackie Chan movie there. So I recognized some of it as I was walking through. But it's a town that had these beautiful, it has narrow streets that are made of stone, paved with stone. And the stones are 1,000 years old. And so the locals like to say that, you know, the stones have been worn many years by horses and people and everyone walking on them. And the homes are built sort of around these narrow streets, and they all hang little red lanterns out in front, which makes it very quaint and charming. But there's also a lot of hidden sort of courtyards in Dashu. And this is one of those courtyards. We had been invited in to photograph, and I was very lucky to get to see this. I think this place is sort of off limits sometimes. Although I found walking around Dashu, even without speaking the language, I could strike up a conversation with the locals, and they were very, often they would invite you into their home and chat with you or share things with you, memories. They saw me with a camera, they would show me photos of their family and things. And it was really a great visit. It was wonderful to just walk around that town and enjoy the hospitality of the locals. Some of the buildings are also used as markets and shops. It's a big shopping destination on weekends. And it started out actually as a market city because it is built along the banks of a river. So what happened was a lot of people would trade there. It was a trading destination. And it still kind of is, even though now it's more touristy shopping. I think I got a t-shirt there, which is, you know, in line with the touristy shopping part of it. But it's also a very quaint, charming village that's a little bit out of the way as well. And here you can see the hanging lanterns that I referenced before. There are no cars in Dashu in the main area. There are scooters and people walking. I think they also have horses too. You can ride a horse if you're so inclined. I walked through the town primarily and really, like I said, got to share in the local stories and everything. You can see on the left-hand side here, there's an open door. And usually, sometimes there'll be people sitting out front and you can just chat with the locals and share their stories. But I found it to be a really quaint, charming town. And in this image, you can also see the stone pathways. These stones are 1,000 years old, interesting enough. And here you can see the typical Chinese architecture for the bridges. China is famous for these sort of semi-circular bridges. They span a lot of the canals and riverways and things. And I fell in love with the architecture of China as well. I thought, you know, I love architecture anyway. And so I was really enamored with the round bridges and the wooden buildings with the rooftop, with the tile roofs. This bridge is actually located in a place called 7-Star Park, which is a large park in the center of Guilin. Austin, where I live, has a park called Zilker Park, and it's very popular. And it reminded me very much of Zilker Park. It was a place where the locals hang out. You see people playing mahjong. There's a Buddhist temple. in the park, and it's a very common on a nice day. You will see in the morning, you'll see people doing Tai Chi. It's just a very popular hangout. And I think actually United States President Bill Clinton did a speech there once talking about the environment. And so he traveled there and gave a talk in the park. It's a very large park with, it has, I think, a zoo in it and everything, but it's used a lot by the locals, even though sometimes the tourists do venture into. And this is a temple dog. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing. A lot of the Buddhist temples have these temple dogs that guard the temple. They're sort of like gargoyles, I guess you would think of them in Western ways. But this temple is actually called the Praying Sage Temple. And it's located along a path we call the Medicine Market, which was basically this winding dirt roadish type of a path that had markets built along it. And it was really a place that was outside of the tourist areas. There were no foreigners really go here. It really is a place where the locals go to buy ingredients for Chinese medicine, herbs, things like that. They also sell food items. Like I saw some mushrooms and things like that people use in cooking. They also sell cigarettes. There's barbers and tailors that are here. So there's lots of little shops and things. And a lot of locals they take their scooter and go over there. And it's sort of this outdoor market, open air market that spans for about a mile. And in the middle of this market, or sort of at the beginning of this market actually, is a temple that's built into the hillside. It actually has a cave grotto inside of it. And it's a local place. It's not really, not a lot of foreigners go there. And I was lucky enough to go in and photograph and again, meet with the locals and talk to them and share their stories. And this was the temple dog that guards the outside of the Praying Sage Temple. And here you can see, this is a happy Buddha. I love the happy smiling Buddha face. This Buddha is actually in the temple complex inside of 7-Star Park. From my studies, I know that some Buddhist temples are used for teaching, and they have multiple buildings. One will serve more as a school, and one will serve more as the traditional temple where you would go to say prayers. And the 7-Star Park complex was just that way. There was a sort of an educational area with books and more of the learning area. And then this happy Buddha was located in the praying area where the monks would say the services and people would go to say prayers to Buddha. So I recognized that, and I just thought he was a wonderful, happy Buddha. And he's got sort of the prayer beads in his hand, and this is a sort of heavy set Buddha. There's different depictions of the Buddha to indicate different things, but this is a happy Buddha. And here we have the sun and moon pagodas. Now this image is interesting because it is taken in the more touristy area of town. This is along the river where there are many hotels, like the Western style hotels, like the Sheraton and the Hilton, I think are all right nearby within walking distance of this area. But I did want to manage to go down here and check it out at night. And I thought it was interesting to photograph at night. It made it a little less touristy for me. But these two images are very iconic of Guilin. They represent the sun and the moon, and they're pagodas, traditional Chinese pagodas, with the point on top indicating knowledge. And these pagodas are actually connected by a bridge at the bottom, which is not visible. It's sort of hidden on purpose. And they want you to think these are two completely separate buildings, structures. An interesting thing to note about this is the building on the left, the Sun Pagoda, is actually bronze. It's made of bronze. And it's one of the largest, I think it's the largest pagoda, bronze pagoda in the world. It has a lot of facts about it that have held over time. It's a very large bronze building, and there aren't many of them as tall as this one in the world. So a lot of people, it's noted for that as well. And now moving on to another one of my favorite locations, Venice, Italy. When I went to Venice, it's one of those stories. I had this idea that I was going to photograph spooky Venice, and I was going to shoot it at night, and I was going to photograph everything at night, make all the buildings look really scary. and make it look like a Halloween movie or something, with shimmering water and ghosts everywhere. And I had this great idea, and I got there, and the buildings at night all had this beautiful golden glow. And I thought, oh, they are just so beautiful. That the Venice at night is just a beautiful place. And I fell in love with it. And my idea of spooky just went out the window. And instead, I sort of fell in love with this. We call it sometimes Tuscan gold, even though it is in Venice as well, but these sort of golden buildings, these glowing golden buildings at night. And of course, the stillness of the canals. Venice is a city that people do live in it. It is populated, but it is very touristy. But at night, a lot of the tourists either stay in their hotel or they sort of vaporize. And a lot of the locals go outside as well. They live in nearby islands. They don't live on some of the main islands. So because of that, it's not uncommon for you to be able to experience Venice by yourself. You can often walk around at night and not see somebody else. When I was out, there was actually someone from the opera house practicing an aria at night and singing in the canals. And so as I was photographing these images, I heard this beautiful tenor performing. And it was really great because I got not only a free concert, but I got to see and experience these beautiful glowing golden buildings at night. And of course, other things like the food is great there too. So, that doesn't hurt. But here's another image. This is one of my very popular images on Carol's Little World. This is actually a family boat. That home on the right that has sort of the green edge to it. That's where the family lives, and this is their family boat. It's very common for families to have boats in Venice. That's how they get around. It's like a car. But you can see that here. And this is one of my more popular images. So much for spooky Venice. I got this beautiful side of it. And I'm not sorry. I really love the beauty of Venice. It is just a beautiful place to visit. And again, here's another take on Venice. This is a reflection in the water. You can see that sort of Tuscan gold building in the daytime. Venice has wonderful architecture in terms of the archways and the balconies, and part of it is very ornate, and I found it to be very lovely. Again, the architectural details, windows and doors and things like that are just so beautiful. And that's something I really loved about it. And here we go to another location, which is Santorini, Greece. I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to the island of Santorini and the city of Athens as well in Greece. An interesting thing about Santorini is it's built on a volcano. And many years ago, the volcano erupted and formed what they call a caldera, which is basically the edge of a volcano, a fancy name for that. And because the way the volcano blew up, the center of the earth sort of dropped, and that left these sort of cliffs almost going into the sea. And so they built much of the architecture in these white houses that you see, and multicolored houses actually, are along the cliffs going into the sea. And so it's very interesting. They built these sort of cliff houses, and many of them have domed roofs or they're round ceilings, what they call barrel vaulted ceilings. And I was lucky enough to stay in a very traditional cliff house with a barrel vaulted ceiling for my stay. And it was really very beautiful. In fact, some of my black and white work won an award for its architectural studies, just from the architecture point of that place, because it's really interesting architecture. It's very unique. And here you can see, this is another village. This village was really interesting because it had a bunch of red doors, which is unusual in Greece. The traditional Greek churches have their white buildings with sort of blue round domes. In fact, the blue and white motif is so common in Greece that the flag of Greece is actually blue and white. And it's very common in Santorini to see these sort of white villages with the blue dome churches. There are many blue dome churches on the island of Santorini. It's very, very common. Some of them are quite small. They only hold 2 or 3 people, but they still have white walls with that blue, very vivid blue domed rooftop. Another thing to note about Santorini is it's on the Aegean Sea. And as part of my trip, I got to sail the Aegean, which is, I guess, sort of a bucket list item for me. The water there is, we use the term Aegean blue as a color if you're an artist. The blue is very unique the water is very blue there, and also the sky is very blue. It reflects from the water, obviously. And so I found the sky and the water to be really interesting there. And of course, the blue domes are reflective of that color as well. So very much blue and white color palette, very interesting architecture, very interesting shapes and lines. And of course, the caldera makes everything interesting because it gives us these angles where everything sort of glides into the sea. And here you can see a more abstract image. This is a blue door also in Santorini. You can see that white and blue motif. It really pops out in all around Greece, but especially on the island of Santorini. And this is the town of Ia. It's spelled O-I-A. It's pronounced Ia. It's the northern part of Santorini. It's a very popular destination. It is a tourist destination, but I did get to photograph there some as well. And you can see here, again, the churches with the blue domes and the white buildings with blue domes. It's very common in Greece and very lovely. Part of my trip for Greece, I really enjoyed the food and the wine there. You can see there's a branch sort of curled up on the lower right of this image. And what that is on the island of Santorini, they found that growing grapes can be a little difficult because the climate, again, is almost desert-like. It's very dry. And so what they do is they dig these holes, and instead of growing the grapes above ground, they sort of twist the vines around into circular loops and sort of half bury them in the ground so they don't need as much moisture to grow. Because of that, the wine is really very tasty. And this part of Greece near here are what they call a blue zone, which means that there are many people that live to be over 100. And part of that they think is related to that wine. It is very nutrient rich because it grows in the earth as partially in the earth, partially covered, as opposed to on like a trellis or some, a vine that's above the ground more so. But those twisted vines, vines in a circle, is also a common motif you will see on the island of Santorini and in Greece in general. In this image, you can also see a peak of the sea in the background. That would be the Aegean Sea. And here you can see the very top of the beautiful church, the Blue Dome Church. It's white again on top. And of course, that beautiful blue sky, that is the Aegean Sea, Aegean blue sky, is really very lovely. And here I did an abstract image at night, at dusk. Again, it's got that blue sky with that, I made it nice and abstract, and sort of did my exploding images the way I always do. But this is another different architecture for the caldera. And the lights, as you can see, are actually down the edge of the caldera. So that angle really makes for interesting photos sometimes. And this is an image from Mexico. I was lucky enough to travel to the town of San Miguel de Allende in central Mexico. One of the things I love about Mexico is the colonial architecture. There's very much colonial architecture in Mexico. It is very popular there, and it is really beautiful. This image was taken from a fountain in the center of San Miguel. There's a giant church called the Parroquia, which is it's actually, I think, it's a neo-Gothic church. It's almost Gothic. It's just past the Gothic cutoff time, but it looks Gothic. It has that look about it, and of course, it had a beautiful fountain built into it. And so this is from the fountain in San Miguel. And here we have. This is a different architecture. This is from Kyoto, Japan. On the outskirts of Kyoto, there is a place called the Museum of the Mountain. And this was designed by famed architect I.M. Pei. And what he did was he was given an unlimited budget and said, here, go build a museum. And what he did was in order to access the museum, there is both a bridge and a tunnel. And it was really fascinating for me to experience the architecture of this place. I really fell in love with it and just had a grand time working in this place. The interesting thing about this image was, originally, I wanted to take it with no people in it. And I tried very hard to get, there's always people walking through this tunnel. And so I staked myself out and I got ready and I waited and waited and waited. I finally got an image with nobody in the tunnel. And then afterwards, I saw this one person walking in this dark, sort of black, dressed in black. And I took a photo of with this one person in the tunnel. And you can see here, this is the one I favor. I very strongly favor having the one person in the tunnel. It really just makes the whole image. And so I tried to get it empty, and I got it, and I ended up not liking it. I actually prefer the one with the person in the tunnel. So now you know, that's my little secret. But this is an IMP designed tunnel on the outskirts of Kyoto, Japan. And this is another city in Japan that I had visited. It's a city that's built along canals. And it's really interesting because they had these boats there these are all handmade boats. And they have sort of a boat quay, which you can see on the left-hand side. It's, where the boats, where you can hop onto the boats. And this city actually is a lot of painters were there. There's a lot of watercolor artists that go there and paint sort of the architecture here. It's really very, very lovely place. I had traveled from Kyoto south to go to a place called Art Island, which is called Nashima, which is the place where the pumpkin is, the colored pumpkins that the artists had done. And it's also a place where Andy Warhol stayed when he stayed in Japan. And this village is actually called Kiraseki. It's on the way. We stopped and visited this place. And we stopped there because it had significant architecture, and we were all interested in that. And actually, there's also a museum here, which is home to many, there's a printmaker named San Francisco, and his work is in that museum. And a lot of the people I was traveling with had gone into the museum to see the printmaking work. And I was so enamored with the canals, I didn't spend much time in the museum at all. But I was lucky when we went to Art Island, I managed to catch some of the work. The same printmaker, his work was on display there, and I got to spend some time. I actually stayed in a place called the Benessi House on Art Island, which is right next to the pumpkin. So the pumpkin was in my backyard. Great times, but my trip to Japan was really very lovely. I really had a great stay and really got some great photos too. This is a close-up detail of a temple. Kyoto is home to over 1,000 temples. And I enjoyed photographing both the big famous ones and the small little ones that are off the beaten path. This is a temple where they actually have sort of this water as an offering, and basically you can drink from the cup, and it's thought to purify yourself. So a lot of people, as they come into the temple, they will take the cups and enjoy the water, take a taste of the water. But as I was walking around, I noticed the cups were laying in this sort of interesting pattern, and I thought, oh, this would make for a great image. So that's what you see here. This is from the temple. It's a detail of the water. And this is a city, this is a little town, it's a little part of Kyoto called Ohara. It's a little village that's on the outskirts of Kyoto. And I actually fell in love with this place. It's really up in the mountains, and it's sort of this wonderful, quaint little charming town. We went up there for the day, and we visited a farmer's market. We met a lot of locals. We met an indigo dyer and, the dye fabrics, and also a persimmon. Kyoto's home to many persimmon trees. So I met a persimmon dyer who dyes fabric in the persimmon colors. An interesting thing about Japan in general and Kyoto that I found, the color palette's very, very interesting to me in Japan. I noticed it the first few days I was there that my eyes, it's very soft colors. You can see the red on this building. I'm from New York originally, and I live in Texas now, and we have barns. And usually we paint barns sort of these bright red colors. And in our advertising, if you look at Coca-Cola and Kentucky Fried Chicken and a lot of companies, they use these really bright red colors. Well, in Japan, they shy away from the bright reds, and they use the persimmon colors more. And so you can see that reflected in their sort of barn-like house, if you will. It's much more a subtle color. It's much more of a subtle color palette. And I noticed about 3 days maybe into my trip, my eyes just sort of went, oh, this is so wonderful. This is so lovely. It's soothing almost, the color palette. And I noticed as I walked around that there's nothing jarring, especially on the color palette. An interesting thing that's happening in Japan is that as American companies have moved in, as Coca-Cola and Starbucks and KFC have moved there, They toned down their color palette to appeal to the Japanese buyers. But the Japanese companies have actually figured out that, hey, we can get everybody's attention if we use bright red in our ads. And so now they're starting to use the bright reds. And I wish everybody would just stop and go back to the persimmon, especially in Japan, because I really find it to be very lovely and restful on the eyes. And actually, if everything is persimmon, you don't miss the jarring red, and you do pay attention to the ads just as much. But this is the little farming village of Ohara. And while I was in Japan, I also got to have lunch with a Maiko at a tea house. And that was a real treat for me. I thought it was really interesting. I love the tea culture. I'm drinking iced tea, but I do drink tea very often. And I love the tea houses of Kyoto. I thought they were really very lovely. We had ate and stopped in several of them where the building was very, very old, dating back, I don't know, 1,000 years or some such thing. And so the architecture is really very interesting. The Maiko culture is also really interesting. We got to talk to her and share her stories. For those of you who don't know, a Maiko is a host in a tea house. And I come to the conclusion that a Maiko, a geisha and a Maiko is a geisha in training, by the way, in case you didn't know that. But the geisha culture actually is akin to what we used to have in the United States called a finishing school. To me, it seemed very common, right? They sort of learn musical instruments, how to speak well. They're very polished. They're excellent hostess. They can speak on any topics. For example, when I mentioned to her that I was from Texas, she mentioned a cowboy hat and knew what that was, and mentioned that we have oil where I live, and that, of course, both those things are very true. So she was familiar with a few things about Texas, even though I came from very far away. And I found that to be very indicative of the culture, of the geisha culture. They are very well versed and can talk to you sort of whatever topic you pick, they can sort of converse with you on that topic. It's that host mentality in Japan and also in that culture. But here you can see she's also wearing a very traditional kimono, which is made with gold thread. And I got to experience and see how the process of making the kimono in Japan. And this image was taken along the Philosopher's Path, which is a winding path that goes through sort of the center of Kyoto. And there are temples and many buildings along it. I was very lucky in that when I was there, it was late autumn, but they had a late autumn that year. So a lot of the Japanese maples were turning red when I was there. And it wasn't quite as overcrowded with tourists as it usually is in the cherry blossom season. Everybody wants to go there for the cherry blossom. But this is a lantern along the Philosopher's Path in Kyoto. And here, taking a turn to South America, this is an image from a colonial building in Miraflores, Peru. I was lucky enough to get to go to Lima, Peru, and I stayed in a section. Lima is a very big city. It's also very populated, very densely populated. And I actually stayed in a section called Miraflores, which is a very colonial section. I was thrilled about that. I got to see all the colonial architecture. And the homes and buildings there are all painted beautiful colonial colors. As you can see here, this beautiful red, orangey red color. It's gorgeous. And of course, they have the tile work in line with the colonial architecture. I found the food in Peru was just absolutely delicious, and it was a great place to visit. I had a great stay in Miraflores. I would definitely go back again. It was a wonderful place to visit. And here, I got to tour the catacombs in a church called San Francisco in downtown Lima. This is in the capital part, not in Miraflores, in the capital, in the center, the historic part of Lima. And this is a very ornate, the top of the door of the cathedral in Lima, in downtown Lima, in the capital area. But you can see the carvings is really like sculpture on, as part of the facade of the church. Really very lovely. And like I said, I got to tour the catacombs, which was really interesting. The architecture was just fascinating. As part of my trip, I also got to go on sort of a double-decker bus and with the top open and just sort of drive through the whole city. And I had a blast doing that. And of course, the pisco sours are the drink in Peru, and that's something I enjoyed as well for different reasons. But the food in Lima was fantastic, and the drinks and the people were so hospitable, and it was just it's another great place to visit. I highly recommend it. And here we're back in the States. This is New Orleans, one of my favorite places to visit. I love NOLA. Again, I love the coffee, I love the food, I love the architecture. This is in the French Quarter, a pink building in the French Quarter with a railing, wrought iron gates. What's not to love, right? I love NOLA. It's a place I've been a few times, and I love to photograph the architecture there. One thing you can notice in this image is in the second floor, and even in the first floor, there's only one door in this building. All the other openings are actually windows. And the reason for that is because in New Orleans, in the old days, they used to tax you on the number of doors your house had. So when they built these multi-story buildings, instead of putting a door on the patio to get out to the patio, they would put a window so they didn't have to pay the tax man. And what they would do is they would make the window go all the way down to the floor. So you could just open the window and walk out. It was like a window that was like a door, but it was really a window. So they didn't have to pay tax on it. So that's something you can impress your friends with, is that there's really only one door in this place. Everything else is really just a window with a stoop on it or some such thing. But yeah, very interesting. And you can also see in this building the gas lights of NOLA, which is really another great thing I love about NOLA. Great place to visit. And my last image, I think this is from Hawaii. I got to visit the volcano in Hawaii, and here you can see it too. Volcano National Park in Hawaii is a wonderful place. I got to stay on Big Island. I've been a few times now to Big Island, and I absolutely love the photography on Big Island is great. It's one of the places I really love. Those of you who know my work, I have a tiki calendar. I photographed the tiki men at the place of refuge, and I photographed the botanical garden on the outskirts of Hilo. As I was going there, I found that there are 1,500 species of orchids in the botanical garden, and I love orchids, so of course I got to photograph them. And I love photographing the volcano. It's a beautiful thing. I love the volcano because you can get sort of the fire and air and water and all the elements in one image. It's really interesting. And just the landscape there is just fascinating the way it is. There's a small town near the Volcano National Park called Volcano, aptly named. But an interesting thing about Volcano is that it's sort of overgrown with all these giant ferns. And you would think that when the volcano erupts, that it would just kill everything and everything would be dead. But actually what happens is the soil then becomes exceptionally fertile. And so everything grows, these giant like ferns grow out of the soil. And it looks almost like a fairyland. It's so fascinating. I almost wanted to move to Volcano, except then I remembered it's very near the volcano, and that could erupt at any time. As you see here, it just gets, and actually when I was there, I have to say, the volcano was grumbling at me. So I know Pele is not happy with me for whatever reason. And I didn't want to argue with it. I just took my photos and left to come home. But, someday maybe we'll have a conversation, and I'll try to settle things down with Pele. So maybe she's not as angry with me. And for those of you who know, Pele is a woman. So just to be clear, the gods of the volcano were actually women. So Pele is a woman, and she's a little bit angry at me for all the grumbling, but we'll work it out. We'll work out our differences at some point, I'm sure, as I go back and visit her again. So Pele, I'm going to come back. We'll have a chat. We'll work things out. That's all my images. I have a little video series called Travels with Carol that's on YouTube. I think it's linked from my Austin Studio Tour page. At some point, I'm going to do more travel logs as we can get out into the world again to go see things. I'm also doing a series of travel guides, so look for those coming soon. If you want to follow my travels, maybe the best way to do that is I have a Facebook group called Carol's Little World Art Group. And I'm going to make my travel guides exclusively available in that art group. So I would encourage you to go on over and join that group to get access to that material. As part of the Austin Studio Tour, I'm also doing a giveaway. I'm giving away one of my calendars featuring some of my travel images. You can enter on carolslittleworld.com, or you can follow the link from either my website or from the Austin Studio Tour, I believe has a link as well. But here's the link in case you want to check it out. I'll be giving away a calendar as part of the tour. I'm really excited about that. I have 2 calendars this year for 2022 wall calendars. One is my Tiki calendar, and one is my images from China called Beautiful Under Heaven. On my website, I sell some merchandise. I have a coaster shop with a lot of coasters. I sell a few t-shirts and the wall calendars that I spoke about. And of course, you can also buy prints of my work from carolslittleworld.com. For more of my work, if you want to see prints or just larger images of these, all of this work is available on carolslittleworld.com. If you use the destinations link, that will take you to my travel images. I just want to give a huge, big shout out to everybody in Austin and everybody supporting this tour. It has been a great tour for me. I can't thank everybody enough for participating, for doing it, for helping make it happen. A big, big thank you and shout out to the folks at Big Medium, Coke Trevino for putting together all that she's done. This year, this tour has been a fantastic journey for me. I've gotten to know new artists. I've gotten to collaborate. I've had connected with old friends. It has just been a wonderful experience. I know with COVID, the tour really got knocked on its sides last year, and we were scrambling to really make it happen. And everybody was wondering, would we come out of COVID better or worse, or what was going to happen? And I have to say, this year, it feels like the old tour is back. It's just been phenomenal. I really feel connected to the Austin art community, and it's been a great experience to be on the tour. I'm sorry it's ending soon as it is, but one last note, this picture is a picture of me in Kyoto, in downtown Kyoto, and it's something I cherish because I love getting out into the world, and I don't photograph myself very often, but just the idea that I can get out into the world and see things and explore with my camera. And that is a photograph of me doing just that. Downtown Kyoto, walking around with the camera, taking in the sights. It's where I want to be. It's where I want to go next. If it's not Kyoto, someplace else. But that's the idea. I'm going to be out with that camera, walking around, seeing the world, learning and exploring. And I hope you get to do some of that. Thanks for checking out my work. Thanks for supporting the tour. Thanks to Big Medium. I will see you soon.